nationally renowned DBT expert, author, and clinician, Diana Partington.
And I was like, I had this fantasy that I was going to be a total badass. I went to him and I was like,
you didn't want to be Diana Partington, the parakeet poop cleaner?
And I was like, well, that wasn't working. And I spun into this depression where for 2 weeks, I just didn't get out of bed. It just felt hopeless. I was like, literally, misery, here I am. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, I was just like, I felt like I would kill him if I saw him, because I will literally rip your eyeballs out.
So you went from suicidal to homicidal.
Yeah, I was like, this is not going to be my story. And fortunately, I was skillful enough to know that that's not a good idea. No, that does not end well for anybody. It's either you can change it or it's just everything's terrible.
Yep. How did you identify existence
and
what,
God.
right?
Oh, that one's so easy. I was nothing. Just was like, I understand why I'm like this, but I don't know how to do it differently. Fortunately, some wise soul was like, you need to go into DBT.
Welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. My name is Patrick Custer. I am your host and so excited to be here with you on Mental Health Awareness Month with my guest and friend, nationally renowned DBT expert, author, and clinician, Diana Partington.
Patrick, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
It's so sweet to be here with you.
Absolutely. You too. We have about 125 things I want to talk about in our hour today, which I'm sure we probably won't get to, but even if we just talk about one of them, it's going to be the most fascinating time together. So I'm really excited to kick this off. So you have such, and I know some of it, but I am excited to know more and unwrap this because your personal story has laid the foundation for the way you are changing lives and helping to create positive shift in the world today. Tell me from the beginning how you would describe your life.
You know, it's funny because I feel like there's two different stories, which is very dialectical. So, in dialectical behavioral therapy, dialectics are two opposing things can be true at the same time. And there is a story that's really lovely, right? Growing up overseas, traveling, going to this amazing school that I went to in high school and, getting a good education and having a family. I mean, there's just a lot of really good stuff. But then, of course, there's the other stuff. And that's the juicy stuff.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
So I've been, as a clinician, I've been very out about that I have a history of suicidality. But I'm always mysterious about why I was so suicidal. Because I first remember being suicidal when I was about 5. And that really carried on until I was 39. And then I went through Dialectical Behavioral Therapy as a client. And that is what really changed things for me with suicide. I think people reach for different things when they're in incredible emotional pain. And I'm definitely an emotionally sensitive person. Like I feel my feelings really intensely. And I have a pretty significant history of trauma.
So tell me about what you remember because at 5 years old, some stuff had to have happened between birth to 5. What do you remember feeling?
Well, I was sexually assaulted when I was that age. And it wasn't like, I tried to, tell my mom. My mom was just not equipped. Like, I have a lot of compassion for my mother and her mistakes, partially because I'm a mom and now I know how much mistakes you can make no matter how good your intentions are. Yeah. But her, like the very few things I know about her childhood are so alarming that it gives me a lot of compassion for her. Sometimes I feel like with parents, we got to measure them from the distance they traveled. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like doing better than their parents had done. I hope that I did better than my parents did.
I think we can only reach full compassion that allows us to have a true relationship with our parents as adults when we get to that place of, instead of holding them to this image of perfection and saying, well, these are all the things that are wrong with you, doing exactly what you said, is measuring from where did they grow from.
So a sort of significant point in my mental health journey was when I first started going to therapy. So I lived in Indonesia, which makes things really complicated from a mental health perspective. Indonesia in the 80s. And so my first suicide attempt, I was in 9th grade, and I don't ever attempt suicide with Tylenol. It's a terrible way to die. Destroys your liver, and then you die from liver failure. So it's slow and agonizing. And I took a bottle of Tylenol, and so I ended up in the hospital for a long time, but never the psych ward and never treatment. And so, of course, that just laid unresolved. I'd scared myself, but I wasn't getting any kind of treatment.
Right.
And so then the following year, I attempted again. I stole my dad's sleeping pills, and I had a really terrifying experience with that sort of scared me off of attempting again, but it didn't silence the suicidality. Anyway, that summer, my mom took 6 weeks off, and we went to the States to do family therapy. And that's where two really significant things happened. The first one made me really angry, and the second one made me more compassionate. So during the course of that family therapy, my father disclosed that he had always wanted to kill me.
And you were how old?
I was 16 at the time. And it was one of those things that I think can happen in family therapy where it's like, oh, look, we figured this out, so now it's better. Right now we're going to make it better. But I was like, well, no wonder I wanted to kill myself. I've been living with someone who wanted me dead. Like, he literally said, I wished you were dead the entire time you were here, because he was jealous. This is not uncommon. My mom is fabulous, and my dad basks in her attention, and I stole her attention. And he was deeply jealous and wished that I wasn't there to take my mom's attention. So he was very cruel to me. He was a violent alcoholic, and growing up with him was pretty awful in a lot of ways. And so then, like, when he said that, I was like, well, no wonder I want to kill myself, right? If I'm living in a home like that. And there was always that feeling of like, well, Mom, why is my mom not protecting me? And I think a lot of people have that issue, right? When you've got one abusive parent and the other parent is not protecting you. And then the therapist asked my mom, he was like, so what were family? Because a lot of times my dad would beat me up. Like, we'd be having dinner. He'd be picking on me. And then I would blow a fuse, to be honest. I'd be like, stop picking on me. And then he would chase me. And
physically chase you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he would punch me, choke me. It was bad.
Wow.
It was really bad. So it was terrifying to live with him. But my mom, so that the family therapist asks all of us, ask my mom and dad, what were your family dinners like growing up? And my mom says, I was like, you know, like those moments where someone tells you something and you're like, did I hear that? Like, is that real? She said that when she was growing up, family dinners were very formal. My grandfather liked things to be proper. And so always fine china and fancy tables, all that stuff. And you had to have impeccable manners. And so you had to, keep elbows off the table. You have to do all the things, all the impeccable manner things. But he had no tolerance for slouching. So he created this pin cushion system where the pins would stick out. Like, so it was if this chair had the pins sticking out, and if you slouched, you would be stabbed with pins. And then my mom said, yeah, and sometimes when he would get mad at my aunt, he would slam her into it. And her mother had one of those too. Not just my mom and her sister, but my grandmother also was going to be stabbed with pins if she slouched. And when you hear a story like that, it just goes, it's like this matrixy thing of, oh, wow.
Yeah, I just went through that listening because I'm also thinking about, of course, I can only help think about my own reflection of, we were talking before we started filming for this, my posture is so bad. It has been my whole life. And I would definitely have gotten the needles. And
that's why my mother had to be perfect.
Oh my gosh.
My aunt was me in my family, and my mom was the perfect child. I was like the scapegoat, the bad kid. And my aunt was that person also, but my mom was the perfect child.
So can I ask you, when you started family therapy at 16, was your dad, had he sobered up? Was he?
No.
So he was still in the dysfunction, the same as he had
we
been?
had an agreement that he could not go home and hit me after therapy. If like anything that happened in therapy, he was not allowed to hit me while we were in Santa Cruz that summer, in Santa Cruz, California. But of course, once we got home, those rules didn't apply anymore. So it was just really brutal. It was pretty brutal. Oh, I'm not going to cry and wreck my makeup. That's not happening. So I don't try to attempt suicide again after that experience because, well, it's funny, like in the book, you know, I've written this book about DBT skills, and there's a lot of me in it. You know, when you're there, so this book teaches skills using short stories. Mm-hmm. And so the short stories are composite characters. They're stories I've heard on the news, stories I've heard from friends, some composite elements of common stories with clients, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of me in those stories because, you write what you know.
Sure.
And there is for the self-soothing with the 5 senses is one of our DBT skills. There's a short story about a girl who attempts suicide, and what happens to her in her suicide attempt is actually my story, where I was really clear that I wanted to die. My friends figured out that I tried to attempt suicide because I'd written notes, like goodbye notes, but I was like, don't open them till tomorrow. If you have a friend who's depressed and they tell you not to open a note till tomorrow, open the note.
Yep.
Open the note. So they opened the note and called my mom. And this just tells you, every time, don't hate my mom. Every time I think of my mom, I think about those chairs, and all of the rest of the things that were probably happening in that house.
Oh my God.
She sat down with me and she's like, is this what you really want? And I was like, yes. And so then she goes and she's talking to my dad and they're arguing. And I had this really strange experience of losing my body, not losing consciousness, but losing my body. And suddenly I was just consciousness suspended in nothing. And it was terrifying. It was like no sound, no sight, no hearing, nothing. And I was afraid that I had died and that this was what the afterlife was going to be for me, and that I was going to be trapped there forever. So then I was desperately trying to get back into my body, and I was able to. And then I'm like, help, help. And my dad was like, well, why don't you just make up your mind? So, but that experience really scared me. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of has led to on this spiritual journey so I go through DBT, and one of the skills that we teach in DBT is making meaning, trying to make meaning of things.
Wait, can I, before we go to make meaning.
Totally.
Why did that experience scare you?
Because it was like literally being dropped into a void. Does that make sense? Like imagine if you were conscious in a black hole of nothingness. And then you were just there and you thought you were going to be there forever. It was not good.
So what's the underlying theme?
Being alone. Being really, really alone. Oh God, it's like going from feeling so alone, right? Feeling, I think there's so many people who grew up in their families feeling very alone, very lonely. And yeah, it's like, that would be like sealing the deal, right? Now you're going to be truly alone forever. And that terrified me. So from a medical standpoint, I don't know what that was, because I'd taken barbiturates. So old school, so 80s.
There are people listening, watching right now going, what did she just say?
What is that? What is that? Yeah. So the doctor said that I had just lost consciousness because of the medication. But I was like, it was like the opposite of losing consciousness. It was losing my body. And I don't feel like it was like dissociation, because dissociation, you're still aware of your surroundings. This was something to do with the barbiturates or with, I don't know, maybe it was a near-death experience. Because I like, this went on for a while. So, I mean, I don't know. Anyway, I came up and I was like, take me to the hospital, take me to the hospital. And that scared me. And then there's like this long journey, right? Where, I move out of my parents' house. They tell me that if I'm out on the street and starving, don't call them. And they really stood by that for a long time. I moved in with this guy that was very abusive, because I struggle with love addiction. Antidote to loneliness, only not really.
Right.
Not really at all. But I lived with this guy who was really abusive, and I was trying to get out of his place. And I asked my parents for $300 because I'd found a place I could move into. And they were like, you got yourself into this, you can get yourself out of it. They were very like up by your bootstraps, no safety net at the time anyway. So I developed this crippling fear of being homeless. That like everything that was guiding my decision making was about trying not to be homeless. And so I ended up meeting this guy who I knew when I married him that I would never be homeless, and I have proven to be right. Was sort of like eminently employable. So we had a family, and then, but I was still struggling with the suicidality. I was a stay-at-home mom, and sometimes being a stay-at-home mom is really hard. Like you don't go.
I can't imagine.
It's like so much time with little people. And I love my children so much, but it gets boring. And I would say, like, if you take an educated, intelligent woman and you put her in a house changing diapers, it's not a great recipe for mental health, because it's just really hard to not be having complex problems to solve. Does that make sense? And then, of course, kids grow, and sometimes you do get complex problems to solve, but they're not the fun kind.
Right.
So yeah, I did that, and I was struggling with suicidality, but I was kind of keeping it under wraps. And then we moved to Nashville from Los Angeles, and my husband met his new wife on the first day of work. And then he left me 3 months later, and it was like a bottom out. Does that make sense? Like
yeah, when the person
it was so bad. I didn't know anyone here at all. And I found out that he was having this affair. It's so funny. I was so angry. I spent the night, like I told him, he was like, let me come over there and you can yell at me in So his girlfriend's husband called me.
Okay.
So I get a phone call, and this guy says, are you Diana Partington? I'm not going to give my ex-husband's first name, but anyway, blah, 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 so-and-so's wife. And I was like, yeah. And he said, well, my wife is having an affair with your husband. And I was totally clueless, like so blindsided. I thought we were great. We had just done our 10-year wedding anniversary in New Orleans, and he was all over me, and it was so much fun. And then all of a sudden, like my whole life got screwed. And I was like, don't come near me because I will literally rip your eyeballs out.
So you went from suicidal to homicidal.
Yeah, I was like, bam. I felt like I would kill him if I saw him, really. And fortunately, I was skillful enough to know that that's not a good idea. No, that does not end well for anybody. But I did have the wherewithal. I was like, I can't go to treatment because I was worried how it was going to impact custody.
Of course.
And so I went to a spa. So I was like, you're paying for me to go to a spa so I can work out until I'm not angry anymore. Anyway.
Did that work?
It did work, actually, because I came back and I was like, okay, people who are married for 50 years are the people who get through these things. Does that make sense? It's not like people who are married for 50 years didn't not meet adversity.
Right.
They met adversity. They went through the like terrible things like this. And then they found a way forward. And I was like, we can move forward. And he's like, no, but I'm in love with her. And I was like, we could have a polycule. And he's like, no, she's a conservative Christian. She'll never go for that. And I was like, so you're just leaving? And we had a daughter that we'd adopted from China that was only 3 years old at the time. I was like, how are you going to break up our family? We just made a promise to the Chinese government. Anyway, he said kids are resilient, which has proven to not really be true. So yeah, the upshot is that through the course of everything that was happening, I was losing my grip on staying alive. I just was like, I can't do this anymore. But I have these two beautiful children. And I was like, I can't leave them. And so I didn't know what to do because I felt like I could not live with this pain anymore. But I also all I ever wanted was to be a mom. And that's pretty lousy to leave your kids in that way. And I was so lucky because it's like 2006, right? DBT was first published in 1993. I've been moving through life dealing with this suicidality, and I had been seeing therapists and working on my family trauma, but always wanting a toolbox. Please give me something. I felt like at the point that I'd been in therapy my whole adult life until I was like 39, I just was like, I understand why I'm like this, but I don't know how to do it differently. And fortunately, some wise soul was like, you need to go into DBT. So I met my therapist, she's in Franklin, Tennessee. And I was a tough patient.
No.
Yeah, I was really kind of an asshole to her the first time I met her. I was scared. I was really scared that this wasn't going to work. It was hard to have faith in it. I didn't really know what is DBT anyway. Like, what, you're going to give me tools? What, you think I'm a tool? You know what I mean? I was like, what, is this some kind of scam?
I want to stop here and ask you, what at this point did you feel internally? How did you identify yourself, worth, existence, and what?
God.
Right?
Oh, that one's so easy. I was nothing. I mean, and my husband was very good at belittling me. So it's a weird dialectic because I thought we had a really great relationship. But in hindsight, the truth is my ex-husband was pretty much good at everything. And when you're married to someone who's good at everything and you're not good at everything, and the things that you're actually really good at, you're not doing because you're a stay-at-home. Well, I did some things that were really good when I was a stay-at-home. But I'm really good at fundraising. I'm really good at people. And I did things where I created groups. I did things, but I came out of that marriage thinking that I was really stupid, which was a really easy place for me to go to because I grew up with a pretty severe learning disability. I'm dyslexic. I didn't learn to read until third grade. I repeated third grade. I didn't learn to do subtraction until I was in sixth grade. It was just really hard. So I did this internal family systems workshop. So, internal family systems, you're identifying these different parts that are protecting you, right?
Yes, I understand. But for the person who, because internal family systems, like when you talk about identifying the different parts that are protecting you, what exactly do you mean? I think this could be educational.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I don't like feeling stupid. Mm-hmm. I don't like feeling stupid at all. It's literally like life-threatening, right? So I have these protector parts that are in charge of making sure I am never anywhere that I'll feel stupid. Does that make sense? Yep. And so, but those parts have come online like since the divorce.
Yeah.
I was pretty much used to feeling stupid. Like it was I had some success in my fundraising career before I became a stay-at-home mom, and that had given me some kind of confidence. But like my ex-husband said, one of the reasons that he left me is because I can't properly fold fitted sheets. Like, okay, I have met a couple people who know how to do that, but they were in the military. You know what I mean? Like, that's not an easy thing to do. But there was just like...
I also just feel like it's one of the most useless skills. Like, what's the point?
I saw this like real simple article about shoving all the sheets into a pillowcase and using that as a storage method. And I was like, I'm about that. I'm totally about that.
I'm about that too. I love that you just shared that. I don't care if there's wrinkles in the sheets.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I felt really stupid. I felt incredibly stupid. And so he left me, and I was like, I lost my health insurance, which I think that's one of the things you do. Like, I'm like, just because my husband fell in love with someone else, now I don't have health insurance.
Yeah.
That was brutal. And I was terrified about money. So I went out. I hadn't had a job in 13 years, and I felt supremely unqualified. So I went and got a job at PetSmart, cleaning parakeet poop off of cages. I did that for 3 days, and I was like, for $8.25 an hour. And I was like, no, this is not going to be my story. And so I went to him and I was like, you
didn't want to be Diana Partington, the parakeet poop cleaner?
That is not.
Sorry, my mind just went there, and I was like, say that 5 times fast.
Diana Partington, parakeet poop cleaner. Diana Partington, parakeet poop cleaner. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I was like, no, I'm going to grad school. And so
which is the obvious decision.
No, it actually is the obvious decision.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Like if you haven't been working, and I tell this to moms a lot, like,
absolutely.
I think this phenomena, because I've seen so many women that are clients who they've been stay-at-home moms, and they actually have accomplished a lot as a stay-at-home mom. Like if you're a band mom, dude, you know how to organize. You have a lot of marketable skills, right? But you don't have confidence because you haven't been paid. And I didn't have confidence. And so I kind of needed to build my confidence. So I wanted to apply to the counseling program at Vanderbilt. And I hadn't done any psychology as an undergrad. One of the things, I saw a life coach, and he said, you should become a counselor because then you'll be able to follow your interests and make money doing it, which has proven to be so true. That I'm always interested in people and their relationship to healing, their relationship to money, their relationship to sex, the relationship to animals. It's always been that way. And so, I have the incredible luxury of having a job that I'm very curious about.
Yeah. And you get to keep that alive.
I get to keep learning and keep learning and keep learning and keep bringing new things back to my clients.
Yeah.
And that is an extraordinary privilege.
Absolutely. So what transpired as you went into school and for your master's, and did you learn anything about yourself in that process?
Well, one of the things that I learned is that I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, legitimately, I really thought I was stupid. And then to get into Vanderbilt, I took the Miller Analogies test instead of the GRE because there's less math on the Miller Analogies test. And I did prep pretty intensely for that test. but I scored in the 97th percentile,
Wow.
which technically makes me Mensa eligible,
Wow.
which is, smart.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not good at mechanics, but that's why, like with my book, I used editors and proofreaders and make sure it's clean. But I was like, oh, I'm probably smarter than my ex-husband. Yeah.
I love that.
I may not be able to fold fitted sheets, but I actually do have a brain. And so sometimes those markers, even though they're like, I don't know, standardized testing, whatever, sometimes those markers are helpful.
I think something that you just said without saying is when we somehow are told or are able to come to the realization that being intelligent, smart, or having value doesn't mean that you're good at everything.
Yes.
It means that it's okay to be good at a few things. And when you let go of that need to be good at everything and compare yourself to the people that look like they're good at everything, it allows you the space to put that energy where you're actually gifted.
I believe in that 100%, Patrick. I really do. And I see that with clients all the time. I'm like, just because you're not good at these things, like I've had clients who they're not particularly good at school, but that doesn't mean that they're not incredibly gifted in other arenas.
Right.
But they've been lost confidence.
Absolutely. And that lost confidence prevents you from excelling the way that your potential is totally there.
Exactly.
Where you're gifted.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I hope that whoever's listening is like going to really take that in, because it's very easy to feel defeated if you're not good at everything, right? Or if you've been told that you're stupid or you're dumb. Like, I remember the first time I got a good grade, because I was like an FCD student. My grandfather was like, "I thought you were always the stupid one in the family." And so when you get that message again and again and again, it's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
But it's that, so the meaning making, coming back to the meaning making. One of the things that I wanted to do with writing this book, so going to grad school was literal torture for me because of the dyslexia, like having to read these dense academic texts, and a lot of DBT is pretty dense and academic.
Right.
And so I wanted to write a book that was going to make it really accessible. So like the book has color pictures and short stories, because personally a narrative is easier for me to read than nonfiction.
Same.
Yes. So I wanted to make something that, and so to me, when I look at the book, I feel so good about taking what was literally killing me, my stupidity, my mechanical difficulty with reading and all of that stuff, and turning it into like something where the best compliment I've gotten from the book was a young man who has severe ADHD and dyslexia. And he said, "I can't read, but I can read your book because you give me things to hang my eyes on." And I was like, yes, I literally wrote this book for you. But it also I ended up at Vanderbilt, right?
Right.
And I write I'm going through, I'm actually finishing up DBT as a client. And now.
So you knew you wanted to be a therapist because that's what you're getting your master's in, but did you know that you wanted to specialize in the arena of DBT at that point?
No.
Okay.
I had this fantasy that I was going to be a total badass. I wanted to work with prisoners and genocide survivors and get out there in the trenches. And then I went to Ghana to do a research study on the Liberia. So if you remember, Liberia had this horrible war where just horrific things happened. If you saw the movie Blood Diamond, it's kind of about that with Leonardo DiCaprio.
I haven't seen that.
So it's brutal. It's a great movie, but it's a brutal story what happened in that country. And we were doing this PTSD research study on the Liberian population as compared to the Ghanaian population. Anyway, it's complicated, but I got assaulted when I was in Africa. I got assaulted by 10 men who were really just mugging me, but I didn't know what they were going to do.
Sure.
And I started fighting and kicking and punching. And that was probably the wrong thing to do because then they just started doing it back. So it was really brutal. And I just was like, I don't think I want to work with a population that wants to kill me. That was just the reality. And I was like, I don't think that I actually there are people who have the mettle to walk into situations with people who have that level of trauma and that level of antagonism that comes from that trauma. But I don't think I'm that person.
Yeah.
I realized what I love actually my favorite clients, I love a fabulous BPD woman. That is my favorite.
Yeah.
I love someone who's just suicidal and depressed. I'm not so good with substance abuse disorder because I don't really relate to that. But when I get these women who are just in so much pain and struggling so hard to manage their lives and their emotions, they are the most motivated clients. And when you give them DBT skills, it's like sponges. And they just take it in and they love it and they start using it and it starts making changes. And it's really, really gratifying.
So for those who don't know, BPD is...
Oh, yeah. So what is BPD?
Yeah.
So I want to give a caveat here. Dr. Marshall Linehan, who invented dialectical behavioral therapy, it was originally developed for people who are suicidal and self-harming, which turned out to have a large overlap with the BPD population, which is why DBT has become considered the treatment of choice for BPD. She doesn't like that diagnosis. She wants to get rid of it and call it emotion dysregulation disorder. Because a lot of the criteria for DBT, for BPD, for borderline personality disorder, are very subjective. Like, what is chronic feelings of emptiness? Now, anyone who's experienced chronic feelings of emptiness knows what that is, but it's extremely subjective to measure.
You could go through and, because what are do you know them off the top of your head?
I don't know. I think I could probably do it. We've got fear of abandonment, frantic attempts to avoid abandonment, instability of identity. So like where your identity is changing, like, okay, now I'm going to be a therapist. Now I'm going to be a bartender. Now I'm going to be and to be fair, like most adolescents would be identified that way, right?
Yep.
And there's also nothing wrong with, I feel like one of the things that's great about being an American is you can reinvent yourself every 10 years. So more power to you to find yourself and don't get locked in. But there's a certain quality to it. So there's this paranoid ideation and dissociation. There's volatility of mood that happens, not like bipolar disorder where it happens over the course of days, but it happens within hours, usually not more than 3 days. And then impulsive behaviors around drinking, life-threatening behaviors like, driving fast, shoplifting, spending money. That doesn't include, because a different criteria is self-harm and suicide.
Yeah.
So
I want to draw what I see as a line there. You're talking about people who feel intensely more than your average bear. Emotions, things, life. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help. We're not given a toolbox growing up.
What is
we're
it?
not. We're not given a toolbox as humans when we're born.
No, we're not given a toolbox.
And so it only makes sense that someone who would be quote unquote diagnosable with borderline personality disorder or hypersensitive,
what Marshall Linehan would say, emotion dysregulation disorder.
Dysregulation.
I just talk about people being emotionally sensitive.
Yes. So people under that umbrella, it would make sense to me that your go-to is going to be reaching out to something / anything that will make you feel different.
Oh, absolutely.
Better. Stop feeling.
And this is literally why I like to talk about emotional sensitivity, because I think it's at the root of so many like mental illnesses or mental complications, because you're dealing with these intense emotions. So according to Marshall Linehan, 10% of people on this planet are emotionally sensitive. 90% are not. So that's why the 10%, we're always being invalidated by the 90%. You're overreacting. Why are you making such a big deal about this? It's not that big a deal. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, all that kind of stuff,
get over
right?
it.
Just get over it. And so the model that we talk about in DBT is called the biosocial model, where you have an emotionally sensitive child in an invalidating environment. Now, this is the thing, is like an invalidating environment can be sexual abuse, right? That's a profoundly invalidating environment. I'm saying that something's happening. Everyone's saying it's not, right? That is.
So it's not the abuse itself. It's the response from the people who are supposed to be your
protecting
protectors.
you. Exactly. So when you get that invalidation, right, you get an escalation of behavior on the part of the person who's emotionally sensitive. And that escalation of behavior, so it's like maybe you're acting out more. And then that can end up having the, parent caregiver get more intense in their behavior.
So it's a cycle feeding itself.
Exactly. Until you get this escalation to the point where maybe someone wants to kill themselves, or maybe they're turning to substance abuse, or like the escalation makes the pain just keep like there's nothing like invalidation to throw, like it throws lighter fluid on the fire of your emotions.
I have not experienced invalidation like that, and I can't imagine what it feels like, especially being someone who struggles with that hyper or emotionally sensitive. I feel weird saying emotionally sensitive because I feel like even people in that 90 percentile might say, well, I'm sensitive to my emotions too. But it's different.
This is different, actually, because it's not to invalidate, the 90%, not to invalidate them. It's that you could literally take an emotionally, like I'm emotionally sensitive. I'm guessing you are.
I mean, I think
you probably are.
I think I am. Yeah.
You're like the level of intuitive empathicness. That's the upside of emotional sensitivity, right? So if we went over to Vanderbilt, because this was verified by a neuroscientist at Vanderbilt, they could give us a particular emotional stimuli, have us hooked up to, I love this word, dew point monitors that monitor your sweat, monitor brain activity, pulse rate, all the body things. And so like, let's say we take a not emotionally sensitive person and their boyfriend doesn't text them back for 6 hours. That person, their physiological response to that is going to be much lower than an emotionally sensitive person.
Okay.
An emotionally sensitive person is just going to have a bigger physiological response. And the problem with that is then because your body is having such a big response, your mind goes, oh, something must be really wrong. And then your mind starts making up stories.
Right.
And then that triggers the emotion again and again and again.
So it has the potential of pulling one's psyche out of a place of being able to regulate and stabilize itself, where we would normally stay in like a baseline of logic and homeostasis. I want to go back really quick to a question that I had for you that I don't know if anybody else out there might have. There is a misconception among some of us that you helped me with, that I always thought that people with borderline personality disorder, it was required that, or basically everyone that's struggled with that or whatever variation of emotionally sensitive, that it began from a major trauma in life. And what you shared with me and that definition of invalidation is that it doesn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't have to be an actual
big T trauma,
an actual incident. It can be something that internally is going on with a child or individual, and they're just not believed. Right?
Or it's not even necessarily believed. Like I was thinking about the guest that you had on a few weeks ago that was talking about BPD and his sort of like, I don't really know why I have this because I had great parents. I had a great childhood. And so I've had that where people come in and they're like, why do I have these symptoms? They feel like guilty or whatever, that I didn't earn my stripes to have this particular thing. But here's the thing about being emotionally sensitive is you could just be one of those babies who cries a lot, or one of those little kids who tantrums a lot because everything is so intense for you. And you're going to have a parent who gets tired, right? And there's going to be sometimes a parent might yell at you, might try to figure out how to control your behavior. I mean, it's weird because a parent's job is literally to invalidate their children, right? Like your child doesn't want to wear a car seat, doesn't want to be buckled into their car seat. You got to invalidate that. Like they have to wear their car seat, right? You have to feed them healthy food. There's so many things that you have to do for your child. You have to be like, no, you have to go to bed, even though you don't want to go to bed.
Yeah.
Right. And the invalidation of emotion. This is why I think in parenting now there's so much emphasis on validating. I see that you're angry. I understand you're angry. It's very hard to be angry and you still have to go to bed. Right. But when you get a lot of invalidation of the emotion, that again, lighter fluid on the emotion makes it bigger. And if someone's like, why don't you just get over it? It's not that big a deal. That makes the emotion more intense. And then that can lead to escalation of behavior. Oh, you don't believe me that I'm in this much pain? And people talk about trying to get attention. And I don't really like that because I think that what's really going on is you're trying to get help. Help me not feel this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it could be one or two things, right? I just don't want to feel this way. It has nothing to do with you. Or it could be like, please, please help me. Nobody's taking this seriously until there's an escalation of behavior.
Right. And it makes sense that once you realize an escalation of behavior is the thing that gets the attention, that may be the thing that you go to.
And that's why I'd like to say it gets the help.
Yeah.
Because there's so much stigma around BPD it's just really hard. And so if you talk about someone trying to get attention, that sounds a little different in our culture than someone trying to get help.
Sure.
And I think the bottom line is it's really always about getting help.
It's interesting that that we're having this conversation and you said, I think you're an emotionally sensitive person. And I'm racking my brain around, I'm immediately, as we're talking, like thinking about my life and my emotions and my relationships with other people, all the things. And I was told constantly growing up that I loved attention. I don't know that I was like quote unquote an attention seeker, but I knew the theme. It was reinforced for me that, Patrick loves attention. He's a performer. He's going to, whatever. And
which is a gift because look at you now. You're so good at this.
Thank you. But I felt like there was always an underlying, like I felt the negative undertone, right?
Oh yeah.
Of like that it was inappropriate at times, that maybe I don't necessarily know that I felt that it was like as uplifting as it could have or should have been. And it wasn't until I started to do a lot of work of myself in my 30s and identifying what my skills were, what I wanted to do in my profession, how I could work best to use my life experience to
harness the gold.
Yes. And I realized for me that it's okay for me to like attention.
Yeah.
Because for me, what that translates to is really, I love connection in various forms of various mediums.
I love that.
So whether it's doing a podcast or speaking on a subject for a crowd, talking to a group, or sitting one-on-one, I love connecting. And it doesn't bother me to do it in environments that would be intimidating to an average individual. I thrive on that energy.
I just think that's so beautiful, Patrick, because really that's again a reframe, right? From trying to get attention to get help, and not like attention seeking, but connection seeking.
Right.
I'm connection seeking. Can you imagine if parents, when they think they have an attention seeking child, they're like, oh, are you connection seeking? Are you looking for connection right now? Because there is like, that's less of a like, look at me,
right,
as it is like a look at me, right? Let's be in this together. I love that. It's so beautiful.
Thanks. This, you do enough self-work, as you know, you get to a place where you're able to, I decided
have those insights.
I decided a long time ago in recovery for myself that I wanted to figure out how to love all the parts of me.
Yeah.
But I needed to know how to do that.
Yeah.
And that journey has been identifying and accepting all the parts first. And once you accept it, you can go on that journey to figuring out how to love all those parts and then harness them for good.
Yeah.
For me, that's been my experience anyway.
I love that.
I think that's a big part of your book as well. And I'm going to venture to say, this is only my opinion, a lot of people could give and this is therapists included, love all my therapist friends. But DBT is one of those things that you really have to be trained in, know what you're doing to administer it. That's why there's an intense DBT training that's quite pricey for people to go through to become a full DBT trained therapist. But there's it, like you said, there's very dense and complex reading around it because there are a lot of complexities. It's a wonderful tool that took a lot for Marsha Linehan to come up with. And I would love for you to speak to, you blew my mind when you told me she realized, because as a woman, she struggled with this and was like, I want to find what's going to work and make me better. Tell me a little bit about what you know.
Story?
Yes. Well, about what the part of like what she knew she had to do in order for this to be successful.
Yeah. So, Marsha Linehan came out in 2010 in the New York Times, revealing that she had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is so brave. She had self-harm scars that she had been hiding her entire career because she didn't want to be discredited. So she was in a psych ward for 2 years when she was like 18. And she made a commitment that she was going to get herself out of hell. And then she was going to go back and get other people out. She's a Catholic, so,
Yeah.
So I just love that imagery. Actually, I even have an image in the book of that. So the thing about being a woman who has BPD, right, is it would be so easy to be discredited. So she's developing this treatment and it's like ironclad. She starts this institute. They do so much. There is so much research that has been done on DBT, which is why we call it an evidence-based treatment. And so I think she came out when she finally had enough research behind her to not be discredited. And it's kind of not funny. It's kind of crappy. That even still, there are people in the mental health profession who discredit her now because of that. Yeah. No matter how much research, no matter how much integrity, no matter how many people, like, I think DBT saved my life.
Oh my gosh.
Literally.
Every person I know who's actually done the DBT work, and I don't mean just started it and half-assed, you can't half-ass DBT.
No.
If you're going to do it, you got to do it. And, but it has changed their lives.
Yeah.
And So where I wanted to go with all of that is that I think that there's so much education that can be done around a general understanding. And I love your book for the purpose of, because the type of learner I am, I'm auditory visual. I need stories. I always talk about how I need a good metaphor. I mean, your book is wrought with all of these things, right? And exercises for, you to put yourself in the same place. So useful. I think it's useful for any person, whether you think you identify as quote unquote emotionally sensitive or not. I also think that it's helpful for your run-of-the-mill CBT therapist who hasn't had the education, the formal education on DBT.
Here's the thing I think so there's DBT, the treatment as a whole, and there's a whole philosophy and a whole approach for like what you do in individual therapy, how the whole wraparound treatment works. But there's also in the middle of it, there's this toolbox. And like my book can be a self-help book because anyone can benefit from this toolbox. And so one of my favorite things that used to happen when I worked with teenagers, which I don't do anymore, teenagers have to come to DBT group with their parents. That's the adherent traditional way to do it. So initially it would be moms coming, sort of predictably. And then one time mom couldn't come and dad would come. And then suddenly dad's the one who comes because men love the manualization of this emotional stuff. Like they would learn validation strategies. So there's the 6 levels of validation. Like, so I feel like that turns a man into a relationship superhero if he can actually sit down with someone and validate them instead of jumping to problem solving. Wow. And so I don't know that like these, kind of fancy corporate guys, they were eating it up because it's so straightforward. And so it's that thing. There's lots of people who are like, we should just be teaching DBT skills to all high schoolers. But yeah, so I feel like what I've tried to do is create a toolbox. You can open the toolbox. You can pick a picture that you like because it's full of color pictures, and then read about that skill, read that story. So you don't have to do full DBT. You don't. So as a clinician, like any clinic, actually I was at the American Counseling Association conference and they were eating up the book. It was great. We sold out because people were like, oh, well, DBT is so unapproachable as a clinician. Like you have to do all these things. And I was like, you actually don't. Like you do if you want to do full adherent DBT. That is really true. It's a very rigorous training. But if you want to use the toolbox from DBT of these incredible skills like radical acceptance, opposite action, stop skill, like that's just stuff you can teach your clients. Or your client can read the book and learn it themselves.
I'm curious because I know we're getting close to end on our time, and I want people to get your book and read it because it is so powerful for anyone's life. But I also want to talk about the first, or maybe some of your favorite skills that come to mind that you could talk about.
So when I was learning DBT skills as a client, the skills that blew my mind were radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is about accepting things as they are, not fighting reality. And so we say in DBT that you have 4 options, actually 5 options, when you're in a painful situation. The first one is to change the situation, right? So like you don't like your job, get a different job. Or you don't like, something that's happening, you change it. Sometimes you're not in a situation where you can do that, right? It would be nice if changing jobs was that easy, right? But sometimes it's not. So you have the option of changing your perspective. Okay, well, these are the good things about my job, and I'm going to lean into those things, right? Radical acceptance is radically accepting, I don't like it here. It's not a good situation. And for right now, maybe while I'm looking for another job, I'm going to stop fighting the place and just kind of because when you're fighting it, you're adding the suffering.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It's bad enough that it's not a great job. But if you're like, it's terrible, you're pouring on the suffering sauce. Right. So if you're like, okay, I recognize it's terrible, but I'm going to go in and I'm going to make the best of it until I get something else or until something changes. Radical acceptance. So radical acceptance is really helpful. Like with my divorce, because I didn't see it coming, didn't want it, didn't like it. I go and I start teaching DBT skills, and it's a year-long curriculum. So every time we wrap around to radical acceptance, I'm like taking my temperature. Have I radically accepted my divorce? Nope. And then another year, nope. And then finally, like 10 years in, I was like, oh, I think I have radically accepted it. And then some difficult things have happened with my kids, and I've unradically accepted it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Because that happens.
Yeah.
You radically accept and then you unaccept. And then you turn your mind back towards acceptance because it's less painful ultimately. The fourth option is staying miserable. And I love this option. Have you ever done this where you like just kind of wrap yourself in the shroud of misery and you're just like,
course.
I'm gonna just marinate in this. It's so awful. And I just think that's epic to be able to like recognize that's a choice.
Right.
I get to make that choice. I'm going to be miserable, and that is what I'm doing. And the thing that was revolutionary to me is I pretty much thought you could either change the environment or stay miserable. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I was like, so if I can't make a change.
Wait, you mean you thought you had black and white thinking that there were only two options?
What? Me, not me. I'm dialectical since birth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought there were only two options. Exactly. It was very black and white.
Yeah.
And all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's either you can change it or it's just everything's terrible.
Yep.
The fifth option is to make things worse. But again, with that staying miserable, I think about like, when shutdown happened during COVID, I had my little office where I was renting to therapists. Now no one needs office space. I have my business. I loved seeing people in person. That was my whole thing. And I was like, I'm not going to do this telehealth thing. I'm not radically accepting that.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm going to stay miserable. Right. And I was doing these weird, creepy phone calls with my clients where I felt like an intrusive aunt. Hi, dear. What's happening with your boyfriend?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that wasn't working. And I spun into this depression where for 2 weeks, I just didn't get out of bed. It just felt hopeless. I was like, misery, here I am. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like I was just like, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't want it to be this way. I'm just going to fight reality here in my cozy bed with Netflix.
Yep.
And I don't care. But I'm not in a financial position where I can afford to just never work.
Right. It's got to end some point.
It's got to end. And so finally, after 2 weeks, I was like, okay, Diana, you did your stint with the misery. And now you're going to have to get up. And so radical acceptance is I can't change things back to where they were, but I can change how I'm dealing with the situation that is. So I signed up for Zoom classes and an ethics course on doing telehealth. And I just went opposite action is another skill. The opposite of what I want to do, stay in bed. Stay in bed and let the world fall apart to prove how crappy the world is. Opposite action is doing the complete opposite. So what's the complete opposite of staying in bed is being like, I am all in with this telehealth thing. I'm going to do it all the way. I'm going to get all the training and I'm going to just be like, bam, this is what I'm doing. And that's what I did. And then I actually discovered that running groups online is fantastic because you can reach more people. It's really good. So
I love how beautiful. And so many of the times that we talk about things that were so like dramatic for us in our lives that on the other side, like once we radically accepted it, it's like, this is one of the things I love to talk about because on the other side of it, it made me who I am today.
Exactly.
It gave me what I'm doing to make a difference. Oh my gosh. It's so beautiful. I love that you chose to talk about that because it's my favorite. And so Okay, so my last question for you today is for those individuals who are tuning into this episode that have identified with any part of your story. Mm-hmm. What words of encouragement would you like to leave with them?
Honestly, I think the biggest thing, I think the thing that has been like the most significant healing thing for me has been loving kindness practice. So we borrowed loving kindness practice from Buddhist psychology, from the Buddhist tradition. And it's a practice where you offer loving kindness, good wishes, beneficial wishes for yourself and other people. Mm-hmm. And, it's a way of really tapping deeply into your compassion. And I think to me, like the skills all make that possible. But ultimately love is the thing. And with my father, when I started doing loving kindness practice back in 2006, one of the things you do is you send love to yourself. You send love to someone who's really easy to love, like Patrick. You send love to someone neutral, like the postman or whatever, postal carrier. And then you send love to someone that's really difficult. Also, everyone, everywhere, all beings. Mm. But you pick someone who's really difficult because this is the real muscle stress. This is like picking up the 100-pound weight. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so I chose my dad. And I did loving kindness practice on him for years. And initially it made me sick to my stomach. And I could only justify it by like, if he was filled with loving kindness, he'd be a better person. Mm-hmm. That makes sense? And then gradually over time, I've been able to really extend loving kindness to him, like a wish for loving kindness, a wish for his well-being. And I've softened and he's softened. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I actually have a father who cares about me. And that's a gift. It's funny, I know a lot of people who've gone through that, maybe not without the loving kindness practice, but when their dads become these little old men who don't produce much testosterone, there's sweeter.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like a totally different person. And so I feel like I'm able to receive that person and have a father, like an actual father, not just someone who you're supposed to call your father, because of that loving kindness practice.
Beautiful. I know that I said that was my last question, but this really is. Why do you want to stay alive today?
Oh, always my children. But I believe, like, this is my woo-woo. I believe that we're all put here to learn lessons. Mm-hmm. And I want to learn all the lessons. And I also feel like, one of the things that gives my life a lot of meaning is to be able to take all the things that I've been through and then turn that around to have deep empathy and compassion for the people around me, for my clients, for my friends, and do things like write this book. This book would not look like this if I did not have a learning disability.
Yeah.
Like I want people with learning disabilities to be able to access things.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? Or even if you don't have a learning disability, if you're just like, I'm not going to pick up a book that's full of text.
That's one of my favorite things about this is that it is for every learning, like intellect
every level, different learning style. Yep.
And learning style, absolutely appropriate for all people. And so I couldn't say it louder and more, with more conviction. Everybody go get this book. It's just so fun to look at too. I mean, even from the front, fun. DBT for life, for life, not just for a period. It's for living life today and for coping throughout. Yeah, and exactly. I love that you talk about how you're continuing to use those skills and practice them. Oh my gosh.
I literally think about skills all the time. I went on a silent meditation retreat and I realized because you couldn't talk, you couldn't write, I was like, looking at my brain, I was like, you think about skills all the time. Every emotion that comes up, all the things. Yeah. I'm using skills all the time.
I would love to say that I access my toolbox all the time, but I'm working on it. So
okay, well, just be clear. I'm not skillful all the time. I might be thinking about.
Oh, you're not perfect.
No,
at everything all the time.
So far from perfect. So far from perfect. But they are all going they're going all the time.
I love it. Diana, thank you so much for saying yes to things that have come across your path, saying yes to staying alive, saying yes to working on yourself, saying yes to writing this book, to advancing your knowledge, to helping other people, to causing effective change in this world. You are a light, and I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So are you. I love that you're doing this and bringing all of your sweetness and your empathy and your care. Yeah, like when you asked me to do this, I thought, oh God, who else would I want to have a conversation like this with?
It's very special.
It is. You are very special.
You are too. And all of you listening and watching, gosh, this is such a great special month. It means so much to those of us who work in mental health care and those of us who receive mental health services. So we are recognizing and celebrating all of you through this today. And with that, I just want to say, thank you for sticking around with us, for tuning in, and remind each and every one of you that it's never too late to start loving yourself. And you're always only ever one decision away from a completely different life. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.